Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just letting the AV geeks kind of take care of everything here. So, well, welcome, to one of our LEPC meetings. We apologize we didn't have one in September. We were trying to schedule Frank O'Laughlin, our resident meteorologist, to give us a presentation, and he couldn't make it in September, so we felt we'd save all of our energy and converse with you and then have Frank provide a presentation. And we felt that based on all the storms that have been happening down south, and obviously they were pertinent to us, if they were to make it up the East Coast, it would have been problematic for us, and we'd have to go through our preparations and preparedness and response. But thankfully for us, it didn't get up here, not so much for everybody down south. So, but we felt it was warranted at this time to kind of have Frank give us a good presentation on weather, because things have been changing quite a bit over the last few years or more. So, and Frank, for some that have seen his regular website or the information that he sends out through the email, because he consults not only for the REPC, but he's involved with the Falmouth Amateur Radio, and he's also with CERT, and he's all over the place. But sometimes I think Frank is, and I don't want to keep tooting your horn, but sometimes I think he's much better, with information than some of the newscasters and meteorologists are out there. And in fact, even, I just reading off of one of Frank's sign-offs on one of his emails after he was given an explanation or his thoughts on a recent storm. He just stated that so many fatalities and injuries are avoidable just by heeding basic instructions and being prepared. And I think in essence, that's what we're here for. A lot of information's put out by everybody. You hope that people would take, some of the information and look at it and make sure things are at home. Simple things. When, if there's going to be, it's very windy out there right now. It's not, obviously not storm weather, but it's a little windy. But as storms ramp up and such, securing things, making sure that if you have a generator, it's operational. Make sure that it's vented. If you have a portable generator out there and you're not running into any issues related to, exhaust getting back into your house and having a carbon monoxide issue, so on and so forth. And we have a lot of information on our LEPC emergency preparedness website. There's plenty of information that's available by FEMA and MEMA. So I think, and throw out thanks to Nate for keeping an eye on things for us too. Nate is our representative for this region from MEMA. So I think we're all in good hands. And for us, we've had a very quiet year. We deal with emergencies on a daily basis, so we manage them like we do, for fire and EMS responses, and we're very good at it. But these bigger incidences, it takes a community of preparers and support staff to make sure that we can assist the community and work through it together and identify issues and try and respond appropriately. But we work together, so having this group meet on a once a month is very beneficial to all of us and keep us informed and work together. And with that being said, I will turn it over to Frank, and I again want to thank Frank for joining us today and gracing us with his brains.
Thanks everybody. Thanks, Chief.
Yep.
Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody had a good summer. It's hard to believe we're almost through the holiday season. Scary thought, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about the weather. As the Chief said, we did get lucky this year. There was a tremendous concern as we went into the beginning of this tropical cyclone season. We had a tremendous warming of the Atlantic Basin as well as the Gulf of Mexico. And the Gulf of Mexico warming continued throughout the season, but we saw a rapid drop-off in temperatures, especially north of about 26, 27 north. And fortunately, in many ways, that kind of spared the East Coast, but also things just didn't line up for us. We were worried that we were going to have names that were going to go all the way to the end of the alphabet, but that didn't really happen. But we have an old motto that it only takes us one single storm to make a season, and well, we only got two, and it made a big season. The amount of costs, I don't have to tell people involved with towns and costs and damage, but the amount of damage that can be racked up, never mind the human suffering and fatalities, is extreme. And it's getting worse with time, and it's probably going to continue to get worse as rates change. But most of the activity was confined to the southeast area of the U.S. In the Gulf of Mexico. Fortunately, Louisiana had bought a good year where they didn't have 6 storms hitting them like they often have, which is scary when you say often, because it's scary. But anyway, so the big storms were in Florida. The amazing thing is that out of all the storms that formed, and maybe we didn't get quite as many forming as we had thought that was going to happen, just about all of them made landfall in the United States, which was a real problem. All the big ones anyway. Certainly Milton and Helene. And Helene was a big problem, and I'll just kind of recap a little bit about the tropics without going into it in detail, because that would be a whole nother presentation. But basically, we had storms that rapidly intensified very, very quickly, deepening explosively. We like to think of it as, basically, dropping a certain amount of millibars in 24 hours. And, when you really see what happened, we basically, especially with Milton, it was almost like, if you remember Hurricane Wilma back in 2005, that incredible season where we actually made it to the Greek alphabet. We don't do the Greek alphabet anymore, by the way, because how do you retire a Greek letter? You can't replace it. So basically, they go to a second set, an alphabet set from A, starting with A again, and then if that's not used, they'll continue on to replace it in the next calendar year, storm year. But basically with Milton, we had a tropical storm and going to bed one night, and by the middle of the next day, you had a real serious Category 5 hurricane. Now, often with these storms, they can get very, very small. We often it's famous that they use the skater pulling her arms in, and you get your tremendous amount of force near the eye wall. But it's true. The greatest miles per hour, greatest velocity, generally is a smaller eye. Wilma in 2005 had a very, very small eye. It was about a mile across. And I remember speaking, I flew at NOAA 43 back in the 80s, but they said they'd look down at their clipboard and they'd look up again, they'd be out the other side of the eye. So that was pretty amazing. Milton was a little bit bigger than that. Helene, that preceded it, had a very large storm. What happens in these late season storms, we get into late September and everything, as storms go northward, they like to become extratropical. They like to get away from just having the heat of the ocean, call it oceanic heat content, which fuels the storms. And they want to become more like the normal low pressure areas we call baroclinic storms, where it depends on air mass. The highs and lows is what causes the low pressure to deepen. And when that happens, they tend to spread out. So yes, the wind speeds can drop, but suddenly instead of having 150 miles per hour and a 2 nautical mile eye, you got a 30 mile per hour, 30 mile wide eye, and you may have winds of, let's say, Category 3, 150, 120 miles per hour, but they're spread out over 100, 150 miles. And with Helene, and to some extent Milton, we had tropical storm force, which is basically looking at about 35 knots, about 40 miles an hour, almost 400 miles. Very, very, very large distance. We saw that with Sandy too back many years ago. When it was an old tropical system and then wants to become extratropical. But those two events were really significant. One thing I want to dispel before we move on to the winter season was there's a lot of everything on social media these days, unfortunately. But there was this meme going around comparing Katrina and Helene. It's like, oh, look at it. It was actually, first of all, it's in serious dispute from the Hurricane Center whether Katrina was actually a Category 3 at 125 miles per hour when it came ashore. We have good evidence it was probably a 140 mile per hour hurricane. But it didn't have time to drop its weakening, and especially its storm surge. Cedar Key, you're looking at about like 9.7 feet, which is a deadly storm surge. But remember with Katrina, if you were standing at Pass Christian, a very famous place for another storm called Camille, during Katrina, it was 27.8 feet. So there are videos of police officers trying to cut through the walls and open the windows so they didn't drown in their own station. So yes, things can happen very, very quickly. And we all saw what happened with Ian, those famous photos of the poor guys at the firehouse trying to carry their stuff out in this much water because it wasn't supposed to come quite that far south. The problem is, it did. So you have to be ready, and you have to say to yourself, well, what if it doesn't quite and plan that way? And like I always tell people, it's the same thing with evacuations. You can always laugh about it twice, but you're only alive once. So you always want to think about that. So the season has kind of folded. Remember, we have never had a major tropical cyclone impact New England after the end of September. We had some baseline category 1s in the past, but more often we get hybrids, like I was talking about, storms that use a little bit of the ocean warm water and a little bit of the baroclinic high and low pressure to derive. The no-name storm of the perfect storm, I don't want to call it that word, but back in 1991, which was only a short time after Bob, remember, it was such a variety like that. So we do get those. We had one a couple of years ago in October. I keep saying it. Smelling fresh pine from the broken trees for 2 weeks. It was a pretty nasty storm. Anyway, enough about the tropical season. We did escape pretty much that. It's too early to say what's going to happen next season, so we'll kind of talk about what's going to happen with the winter season. We are in hybrid season. When it's Halloween and you're in New England, sometimes the worst surprises don't come out of a candy bag. So, it does happen pretty nasty. Remember, it was around Halloween in 1991. It was around Halloween, what happened a couple of years ago. Doesn't take much. So let's talk about winter season 2024-25. Picture you're seeing was from some of those big storms that we saw in those crazy years, 2013, 14, 15, and of course 2018 when we had the 3 storms in a month. Spend too much time at the Mac for those. Scary. It's okay until you're in an old jailhouse and the wind whistles through this, and it could be on Ghostbusters. It's so loud. Anyway, let's talk about a little bit about El Nino and La Nina. El Nino, many people are familiar with. That's basically when we have the warm water that extends off the South American coastline. And what El Nino does is it causes an increase in westerly winds. Now for the tropics, that's good for us because it means shear. And if you can imagine the steam in a bathtub or bathroom billowing up, if there was a fan blowing, we call it shear, vertical shear, because it cuts off the vertical rising of air, blows it out like a candle, we have a lot less storms that develop. But we notice with El Nino, that's when we get our tremendous amounts of rain. In California, we get our tornadoes in Dixie Alley. Although with climate change and other things that have been going on, Dixie Alley has been a lot more prominent with, the last couple of years people have asked, what happened to Oklahoma and everything. We had more tornadoes in Dixie Alley than we've had in the traditional tornado alley. Well, this year, and it is an anomaly in California because we're going into La Nina, but they're still thinking that they're going to get a bunch of atmospheric rivers that are probably going to keep them on the wet side. And they're probably happy about that, keep those reservoirs full. But for us, we're going into the opposite phase, La Nina. And what that means is basically we don't have that real strong westerly wind, especially down around the southern part of the United States. It tends to be more variable, the jet stream, and that's really critical, the jet stream. Think of the jump rope, a wave, and the jet stream is essentially a wave. Like you jump rope when you go like this and it sends the wave to the other side. That's basically what you have with these patterns. And the jet stream is a long wave pattern, and the trough that creates storms is basically a short wave pattern. But with La Nina, which is late getting here, which is one reason why the hurricane season didn't mature in the late part of the season as we thought it would, and we didn't have the amount of named storms that we thought we were going to have. But the jet stream becomes more variable. That can be good in some ways, it can be very bad because it means all of a sudden you get into a stormy pattern, and like what happened in 2018, and suddenly you get hit really hard within a 2-week period. Or what happened, you remember in 2015, we had a 6 or 8 week period where I don't think it got above 32 degrees for like 8 weeks. And we had storm after storm, the 2015 blizzard, remember that, and the 3 2018 blizzards. We're looking at La Nina. Like I said, the jet stream often has a more classic pattern, coming in over the Pacific Northwest, dropping down, and then trying to curve back upward over the eastern part of the continental United States. How deep that trough comes down like this often determines how much cold air can penetrate into the United States. The flatter it is, the less cold air can penetrate. This kind of illustrates La Nina. You can see the blue. The blue is basically the cooler waters. Notice how it tongues all the way almost into Asia. Well, it does make it into Asia. And we know we have the reverse counter on it on the very northern side, which affects us less. But basically, we get less strong westerly winds during periods of La Nina, stronger ones when we have El Nino. Let's talk a little bit about the NOAA outlook. You got to be a little bit careful about this. They're generally about a 64% decent verification of this. Sometimes it can be really nasty, about as good as a rubber chicken. So you got to watch it. But basically thinking that, notice how, if you look at those patterns, you almost say to yourself, wow, it almost looks like the jet stream. And there's a reason for that, and that because the jet stream is determinant about where these more temperatures are going to be. So we're thinking with the La Nina pattern, probably most of the climate models and the longer range models are thinking that the jet stream will be to our west. When the jet stream is to our west, we tend to be warmer. Sometimes we tend to be wetter. But when it's to our east, that's when we got to watch out and we have the big storms that form off the coast. So the thought is above normal, maybe not as extreme above normal as we see in the southeast states. Precipitation chances, well, about even money. In other words, rubber chicken again. You just don't know. It could be either one. Because you may have a dry season, but then all of a sudden you get all your rain in a 3-week period. And then somebody says, I thought we were supposed to have a dry season. You weren't, you didn't. So that's what happens. But looking at basically, we don't think it's going to be a really significant precipitation season. It's ironic, going back a couple of years, if you remember, we had one of the driest summers we'd ever experienced in southern New England, followed by one of the wettest the following year. So things can turn around very quickly. This is something that's often talked about, not accurately often in the media, but the polar vortex. People say, oh, that polar vortex. Oh, okay. It's always there every year. Basically, it's like a big traffic cop. It's a big low pressure system that revolves, remember, in our hemisphere. Everything revolves counterclockwise. If you go down across the equator on the other side, it's a clockwise turning. And that would require 10 minutes to explain, but it's a good class. You can take that. Not what you think sometimes. But basically, the polar vortex, in its normal configuration, extends throughout all levels of the atmosphere. But it's the lower levels that count because that's how it influences the jet stream. And when that happens, and it's strong, it tends to bottle up that cold air in Canada. So we'll get a few times when the jet stream will come down a little bit, but it's not very sharp. When you see on the weather map on TV and you see a jet stream coming down like this, doesn't mean you go like this, because it means you're really going to get hit hard by something, whether it's warm or cold. But with the strong polar vortex, it tends to bottle that up, and the jet stream stays a little bit flatter with a few dips. You notice on the other side where we have a disrupted polar vortex, it comes down like this. And when it's down, basically it comes down to a trough, all the cold air fills, and when in the crest, that's high pressure. The jet stream is critical. This is what we were thinking that the jet stream may look like. Maybe not quite as pronounced as this in the western part of the U.S., but basically when we have a jet stream to our west, that means warmer air can come up the eastern seaboard. Low pressure systems form to our west, bring up warmer air, and we get more rain than snow. Whether that actually happens throughout the entire season is another matter. The science isn't good enough to support that. This is the kind of jet stream we don't want to see. This could easily happen because, again, it comes in over the Pacific Northwest, and it makes the turn down in the Southland and turns rapidly up the coast. The sharper the trough, the more likely you're going to have a really, really intense storm that really spins up. And the cold air will come down to try to fill that void. And that's where we got to worry about it. And everything's location, location, location. Cold air plunges south. We have a blocking high when in these type of situations. We call this the North Atlantic Oscillation, or NAO. And basically, if it keeps that ridge, to our east, and the jet stream is a little bit to our east, then we really got to worry about it. If everything is back further west, then basically everything's warmer. So which way it's exactly going to go, the guidance is sort of indicating the warmer scenario. We'll kind of know in a few weeks. Very often November is going to be a harbinger of how these things work out. Talk about the nor'easter. Again, the jet stream, the trough, long wave pattern right here. Storm comes down, cold supports it, everything to the west of it tries to turn to snow, but the closer you get to the center, and when often, if it's not far enough off the coast, we could have ourselves a little rainstorm, everybody else is getting the snowstorm. And the reverse happens too. There were many times where the snow stopped off the bridge and people say, what's going on the Cape? We have two types, we won't get into craziness, but we have two types of nor'easters basically, a Miller A and a Miller B. The type A storm basically is your classic storm that forms in the Gulf of Mexico. Comes down, gathers energy, all kinds of Gulf moisture, and then just makes a run up the coast. The superstorm of 1993 was such an event. But it tends to bring up so much warm air that very often the Cape will go over to rain. And it's Boston and Metro West and Central Mass, Western Mass that see most of the snow. The greatest storms that we've seen are of the type B variety of Miller, where energy drives, basically forms off the Carolinas near the Virginia Capes or Cape Hatteras, intensifies into a very, very powerful storm, rides up the coast, and then I hate it, but, track is everything, 25 miles can mean the difference between rain, or, basically shoveling for the next 3 days. And also how intense the storm becomes. And you never really know that. It all depends on baroclinic forces. How strong is the height of the, above it? How warm is the water over it? And how sharp is that trough? If it's just like this, well, you might get a moderately strong. But we've seen, like in 2015, where it comes down and then comes up like that. And that's where you have a big problem. But the Miller B is the Cape's realest type of storm that we don't. Sometimes it just scoots out to sea, sometimes it doesn't. This is kind of important. We call this the benchmark position. This is where we're determined around 40 north, 70 west is the best location to produce a significant winter storm in southern New England, especially. But it's for the Boston area, not necessarily for Cape Cod and the islands. As you know, having lived here long enough, it's the storm that just when Boston says maybe just a little bit too far out to sea to really hurt Boston, that's the one that's going to pound the crap out of us. So when it's a little bit south and east of that position is when we get hit the worst. Usually if it's a big storm and it's at 40 north, 70 west, we'll get very intense winds, maybe coastal flooding, but there's likely going to be a rain snow line that develops because of that. So that's something you want to think about. This was the 2018 storm from January 3rd. One of the big ones that we had, 949 millibars, about 2802. If this was a hurricane, it would be a Category 4 type hurricane. But you can't really compare the two because they have different processes. This storm, you notice how it looks, you could almost make it out like it would be a hurricane, especially in January. The only reason you could tell it's a winter storm is you could see look to the south and east of the storm, you could see that warm air just bubbling off that water. If you were down there, you'd see a ton of Arctic sea smoke and things just based on what's going on. But these are the type of events that can sit here and just batter us year after year. And sometimes, like we had 2013, too many days of DUI at the shelter for that one. And, in 2015 and 2018, those were really tough years. But, ironically, 2014 and some of the in-between years were pretty bad too. It's only recently that we've had a kind of a drought of the big storms. And as you know, the one that hit back in, October time period a couple of years ago was still warm enough that, it wasn't a snow event. Had it been a little bit later in the season, it would have been a much more serious event. So right now, the best thought is that we will be looking at probably a little bit warmer season than normal. Not necessarily wetter, but like I said, all you need, we're concerned that the polar vortex may be weaker because of the late La Nina. If the polar vortex is weaker, all of a sudden, that trough sharpens up. It may only be for 8 or 10 days, but that's enough for 2 or 3 storms or a single storm to come down and make your season. Because if you don't have a big storm, you say, we got off easy, I could have golfed, But all of a sudden, if it's only 5 days and you get 2 big storms, all of a sudden, it's a horrible winter. So that's what makes the difference. We're just not sure what's going to happen with the polar vortex at this point. My thought is it's probably going to be a weaker polar vortex. So don't be surprised if overall we follow a little bit warmer and a little bit drier convention. But the jet stream will sharpen up, and all of a sudden you'll have a week or two period where all of a sudden you'll have a very, a stormy period. So prepare yourself for that. When that will be, who knows? Climatologically, it would be the last 2 weeks in January and the first 2 weeks in February. But as 2018 showed, it can happen through the entire month of March. So that's about where we're looking. And I don't want to delay the rest of your meeting any longer, but hopefully that was a little bit of information.
Sure, I have a question, because, we all talk about weather, and you're watching the newscast, and each meteorologist that does a presentation, depending on what channel you have turned on, has a different, view or a different evaluation. But the whole issue regarding global warming and the fact that, what has been expressed is that the winters that we might have seen, if you've been around long enough, when you were kids, or our parents, when you had like the bay freezing over, is this trend going to continue with the global warming, since there seems to be like an increase in the average temperature? Are these very, very cold periods just going to kind of be a thing of the past, or are we going to?
Well, it's ironic because, if you look at it back, just a little bit of history, you look back and you go down to the Capitol and you see George Washington crossing the Potomac and everything like that, and you see huge ice in the river.
Yeah.
Those were real. It's not real today, but it was real back then because it was part of the Little Ice Age back then, which ended, right around the Napoleonic era. But with climate change, yes, we will overall see a warmer period. But believe it or not, and this is a concern, extremes occur. So you could have, let's say, 3 years, and we've had a couple of years of relatively warm. Then all of a sudden you get cream one winter, and you say, where did that come from? And of course, the people that don't like, to talk about climate change, they're going to say, see, they were all wrong, but it doesn't prove anything, And, so that's a concern. So overall, that will be the trend, but extremes will occur. And the other thing, and this is getting into kind of extremes, real extremes, but the big concern among climate scientists is the issue of, we have the thing called the thermohaline Atlantic conveyor belt, and it goes around the Atlantic, and this is what deposits all of the warm air, keeps the UK and a lot of the Nordic countries from freezing to death in the winter. There's a concern that if enough fresh water from melting ice gets into that's what the premise was for that, what was that movie, The Day After Tomorrow?
Yeah.
No, it won't happen in a day or two.
Yeah.
Maybe a lot longer, something could happen, but, movies are movies. But nonetheless, you could return to a period like the Little Ice Age if it's extreme enough. It won't be, won't eliminate, mankind or anything like that, but it could make life very difficult economically for people with rising costs of fuel, things of that nature. So that could happen. We just don't know. Right now, the best thing to say is, unless that does occur, then we're just going to continue to get slowly warmer, but with a few extreme seasons thrown in, like what happened. I remember doing a communications exercise a couple of years ago, and it was a very warm winter, but on the one day I did the exercise, it was our 9 to 11 degree below zero day. If I did it the day before, it would have been 40. The day after would have been 40.
Yeah.
No one remembers. Henry remembers. It was cold.
Yeah.
But those kind of extremes can happen where all of a sudden for a week you're besieged. You say, where did all the winter all of a sudden? And then all of a sudden it's just gone. So, but yeah, it'll continue along that track. It looks like a pretty good bet, unless there's some kind of other intervention that goes on that we're not ready for. But do prepare for extremes. You can't expect that every winter is going to be absolutely warmer than the one previous to it. I guess that's really what the question was. But overall, that is the trend moving in that direction. Yeah.
Right. There is some talk around about the possibility of the Gulf Stream sort of disappearing.
That's the thermohaline,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
Because it starts down there, and then there's actually a conveyor belt that goes all the way around the world. And believe it or not, to make one complete trip around the entire world takes, a long time, like 1,000 years, 2,000 years time.
Wow.
If you dropped a pebble, a grain of sand and followed it all the way around the world, it takes a very, very long time. If you could read about that, a lot of science there. But if that shuts down, it's a big problem for the East Coast, it's a big problem for the West Coast of Europe. We just don't know whether that's gonna happen, so. Bigger pay grade than me to figure that one out. Who knows? Leave that to Michael Mann and the rest of the climate people. But overall, I think it's, people should prepare themselves for extremes. You can't just assume that every winter's gonna be cold or every winter's gonna be warm. More likely, it's gonna be a mix of the two, but with increased extremes become increased intensity of storms. So the strength of the storms is probably gonna go up. We have never seen as many intense storms as we had in the 20-teens and into the last one being 2021, but those what happened in 2018, 2015, and it's rare to get them that close together like that. So expect more of that. See, we just don't know whether they're not always going to be snow. But then again, if it starts blasting houses into the Atlantic Ocean, emergency management has its hands full for that, even if you never get to see a flake of snow. So.
Right. Yeah, and I guess part of our concern is the complacency because everybody's, dressing in layers and hats and gloves. It's not as the last few years seems to be, for being in New England or you could still go out in sweatshirts.
You're right. In other words, like I was told the other day, snowblower sales are down.
Yeah.
Way down.
Yeah.
Hey, we used to be able to say that if you bought a snowblower, it's like buying insurance for a couple of
Right,
years.
right.
There you go.
But not anymore. But now you got people that are not buying them, and as I think you're alluding to, not taking the usual winter precautions. So all of a sudden, when it hits, you're more vulnerable than you would be if you just prepared for a normal winter.
Right.
Whether it's insulating your house, making sure your car's weatherized, all that. It's been warm, we don't have to worry about that, and all of a sudden you do have to worry about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Gambling.
that's right.
Yeah.
Frank, can you talk a little bit about, there's sort of a perception that if a storm is a coastal storm, you sort of know what to expect with regard to storm surge and flooding and the high winds and the damage that will occur. But on the flip side, we look at the North Carolina area and what happened there. Is there some sort of anomaly that's occurring with regard to these extensive flooding events that we're seeing? We saw this in Vermont a few years ago.
Yeah, there is, actually. More people die from inland flooding today than people can even imagine. And it's quite simple, and that is the warmer the earth gets, the more evaporation you're going to get, and the more water you're going to get to precipitate into the from the atmosphere. And you just need the mechanism to bring it down. As we saw with Harvey, it's hard to imagine 60, 70, 80 plus inches of rain in a single place. Now with Helene, to be fair, they did have a monstrous rain event, but that's still part of what you're describing. Even though it wasn't tropical, they had a huge rain event that would have been the equivalent of a regular hurricane hit them, 10, 12 days before that. And then they had Helene, and of course, anything in the hills is a real problem. But yes, we're seeing an increase in flood events, but it's antithesis throughout the world. Some of the drier places are actually getting drier, and the wetter places are getting wetter. But ironically, we've actually had this year some places, even in the Sahara, where it hasn't rained in a long time, had some floods. So, and it doesn't take much in the desert. So yes, you need to be prepared for more and more increase in the amounts of rain that's going to occur in most places in the world. And being a coastal plain like we are, with the Gulf Stream and a temperate environment, expect storms to be wetter than they used to be, no question. Therefore, it's more dangerous than it used to be.
Sure.
Well, look what happened a few weeks ago. The only reason we're not in as bad a drought situation as up in Plymouth County and those areas, because we had that crazy couple of crazy rain events that took place back in September. Whereas the Lower Cape, they only had almost 11 inches of rain in a day. Somebody was saying, imagine getting 11 inches. Yeah, it almost happened around here.
Yeah.
And the Weather Service didn't really say much about it, but that's what can happen, and it can be unforecasted, and all of a sudden, imagine if it had been that had happened, and we had a real wet summer like we had a couple of years ago, and then we had 11 inches of rain. You'd be calling for high water rescue vehicles to pull people out of places. Fortunately, it was dry, so a lot of it did soak in, but you can't always depend on that. And that's what happened with Helene. Basically, it was just, the ground was completely saturated, and then you had 20, 30 inches of rain coming in, and that's it.
all too often that you've had pooling of water by the bridges the way we've had in the last couple of years.
Well, remember, it wasn't just a couple of months ago, remember the storms that just sat up near the bridge
Yeah, just-
for half the day?
Yeah.
You could hear them from 10 million miles away.
Yeah.
And then we had those thunderstorms not only a couple weeks ago,
Yeah.
3 weeks, I guess. The one that everybody's on social media, my dog was crying for an hour,
Yeah.
So, and that just came out of nowhere.
Mhm.
So, they just formed and all of a sudden, boom, 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 so. Anyway, surprises, that's what you should look for, surprises. Anything else? Well, thanks for listening to me clamor on about this stuff, but I do think it is important.
Well, I can't thank you enough, Frank, for sharing that with us, because, I think the once a year that we can get you back here to kind of give an explanation, I think it's very helpful for us to understand, especially for many of us that have to take precautions or to do something, whether it's on a community level, and I thank the town manager, Mike Renshaw, for joining us today, that we're involved to look over the community, but each of you here might be representing an organization that you have to kind of take precautions and get yourself prepared for. And all we can do through, individuals like Frank is to take the information that they provide us and utilize it. And let's face it, there's been plenty of storms that have been forecasted, and we go out of our way to make sure that we're gonna close this, close that, we're gonna cancel this, cancel that, and then all of a sudden, it goes away, and then everybody's mad. But I think that our best, response is to do the right thing and to ensure that the safety of everybody is paramount. And we've done that, and it gets people mad, but I think in the end, most people will understand that, some of the decisions that we sometimes have to make, whether it's, for an event or a community activity, businesses and such, that, we should, err on the side of caution. And, and that's why having somebody like Frank being involved, whether he's with the Barnstable County Regional Emergency Preparedness Group or being part of the MAC. The MAC is the Multi-Agency Coordination Center. They kind of come together during storms for us, and they kind of are a clearinghouse. They can get resources. They can get, we can coordinate some, some essentials if we need it. We work together with Eversource and the other utilities, and we can kind of all spool up and work with MEMA, and also, be able to continually stay informed. Plus, we also provide information from our EOC through the web EOC system that we have with the state, and we can provide localized information that can be broadcast over a rolling scroll that, there's a log, and generally was Boyd. Because Boyd's on his phone right now, maybe doing EOC stuff, but he's usually, between he and Craig, they're generally, putting information in the log, and as Frank kind of referred to, what's happening on the Cape may be different from the northwest part of the state or up by Boston, and we have seen like fires that have developed in like the Boston area, and the winds create other problems, and it may affect a regional area. And same thing down here, we might have regional impacts, and the Cape is much different than the rest of the state when it comes to the localized impacts, because like Frank mentioned, if we were trying to get high water vehicles here, we're not going to get them right away. They're going to be slow to come here, and sometimes we know they're available, but getting them here after the fact is going to be a slow process. But again, the information clearinghouse helps us to make these decisions a little earlier, and it's a benefit to have everybody here, being involved at the LEPC, so we can kind of take care of our own community and work, on a regional and a state level. So, so with that being said, if anybody has anything that they'd like to, input, any questions, we're gonna kind of, even though for us, this room right here is the Emergency Operations Center, but we instantly can change it over into the mode that it is now, or we can square it off and we put all our equipment out and we can have everything up and running in about 30 minutes at the earliest. And we can be in communication with everybody. We're very fortunate here in Falmouth. We have good backup power. We generally have good response from Eversource. A lot of times on the Upper Cape, when there's a major storm event, in the case of Eversource, they will kind of stage in this area. So, you know, and Frank can attest to this, but we've had if anybody's seen in the past at Falmouth Mall, it's become the ground zero for equipment staging, and equipment, transformers, poles, you know, the big machines, the augers that did, the whole parking lot was full of equipment to assist the Cape, because once the bridges are affected and travel is an issue, resources have to be in place early. And they've done that several times, and we're fortunate that it's nearby, and we usually embed an Eversource representative in here with us, and we work with our DPW, and we can coordinate where we need to prioritize getting our power back, because part of our EOC planning, and we've worked with the town and Woods Hole group to determine where our critical infrastructure is. We determine where we try and get the power back on to, again, maintain essential services in the town. The one thing that we get a lot of is the individuals that didn't take heed and take care of getting themselves prepared for the storm and want action right away. And unfortunately, when it gets busy, we have to prioritize how we're going to respond, and we try and provide information as quickly as possible. Mel can attest to that. We get a lot of you have to pull the phone away from you a little bit and wait for the person to finish venting to you. But, you know, we do what we can, but we have to, you know, address emergencies and life safety, and that's our priority, and then we can start working on the rest. There hasn't been one storm that I haven't worked at, and I've been here for a while, that things didn't turn back to normal at some point. It might have taken a little bit, and I always try and remind everybody that the impacts that they're feeling are the same that we're feeling it too. But we can't even be home to help our families out because we're here. So, and we've been here for how many days at that end? Yeah, just days and days, and I think I've spent more time here with storms, and my families had to fend for themselves because that's what we do. And eventually, you know, we're able to muster everybody's efforts and get the community back up and running and get back to essential services. So, and in Frank's conversation, I was supposed to be going to Boone in Asheville right around the same time the storm happened, and I was going down because one of our friends' daughter goes to App State, and App State got flooded, and we ended up having to cancel everything because all the you know, the area around Asheville and such was all, the roads were all cut off and everything, and it was, and I think that was a surprise to them, but they mentioned they had a lot of rain before that, so so things do change, and you just have to be ready for it. So so with Frank's information, we'll still continue to be prepared and concerned about anything that's coming our way. We'll continue to monitor weather, and through the consultation of Frank and others, and working with Nate at MEMA, we'll continue to provide whatever we can to the community. If we have to get ourselves up and running here, we either can partially open EEOC or fully activate it. And when it's fully activated, we have many of the alphabet departments here. You know, everybody's got a seat at the table. We'll try and get the hospital here. Eversource, a lot of our departments will come together, but on a smaller scale, you know, we usually have the DPW, the police department, the tree department along with the DPW, the fire department, and the town administration will join us, and we can kind of work through it. But the bigger the scenario, the more hands on deck are required, and we're prepared to do that. But going forward, you know, we'll see. Hopefully Frank's right, and we have a night, you know, to be outside in 70-degree weather right now is pretty nice. It's a surprise, but it's pretty nice, and but I think it's supposed to get cooler this weekend, so.
But just kind of like back to where it normally
Normal,
should.
yeah, normal cool weather, so. So, Anything from anybody in the audience? Anything anybody want to share? Yes, sir.
Chief, I've always had this question, at what point do the bridges get shut down and who makes that call?
Frank. No, so the Army Corps of Engineers, from what I understand, along with the state police monitors, and it has a traffic plan that they would implement, and it forges through the base and all over, but I don't know what they're gonna do when the bridges like being replaced and everything like that. It's gonna be interesting. But I've always heard that it has to be a sustained amount of wind that has to be occurring, and I've always heard 70 plus miles an hour greater, but I think that they, bless you, that they make a determination and then they'll close the bridge, but here is, you know, the anomaly, like said to Frank, the storm created so much water at the base of the bridge, they closed it. So how do you know, so here you are talking about a wind event, but now you have a rain event, and I haven't heard the bridges get shut down except for ice. And they had that early last winter. We had the bridges had to close down because they got a sheer level of ice on them. It's just with the wind and the cold. But now that we're having this amount of rain, but I think it's got to be a major wind event before they will close it, and it's in conjunction with the Army Corps and the state police.
Yeah, it used to be 70 miles per hour, but there's been some flexibility added to that, and I guess it's pretty, like you said, it's pretty much up to the Corps and the state police, and they kind of take it by a case-by-case basis, you know, because you got the whole, you know, sheltering plan and trying to get people off the Cape and get into higher pay grades than me, but it's scary stuff.
Yeah, I wouldn't, it'd be tough to fathom that we'd ever be in a situation where we had to have mandatory or, you know, or suggested evacuations out of here, because, you know, I watched the weather like everybody else in the news and saw everybody leaving Florida with mandated evacuations, and traffic's at a standstill. And where do they go? You know, I mean, for us, you go off Cape, you gotta, you know, go to a friend's house, go to a family member's house, where you're gonna go. You know, everybody's just gonna be on the road. And then some people aren't gonna heed that and leave. I think obviously the low-lying areas are, you know, we have it in North Falmouth is a good example. In Megansett, we've had water come up through the bay, depending on the surge, and Hurricane Bob and a couple other storms, we had some flooding. We certainly had a lot of damage along the sound. I don't know how many times we've had to repair the bike path, Mr. Renshaw. I know we've had to do that a couple times, and it just bubbles up.
Trunk River.
You know, yeah, Trunk River, and Minot is a good example. They have to get the payloader out there and the shovels and clean the sand off the roads. So we're always vulnerable there. But we're fortunate that doesn't get further in, but we have a lot of low-lying areas that we always know flood, like the Heights corner is another one. It doesn't drain well, and it's, you know, I think there's a big culvert that goes out to the head of the harbor, and it doesn't drain as well. Sometimes it meets the height and it stays there a little bit, but people like to try and test that and see if they can drive through it. They don't make it, but they like testing it. So yeah, so I think it's just for us is to make sure that if these things are gonna be occurring, that, you know, that we have good advice and we make a decision based on good sound, you know, warnings and concerns, and that it's, the potential's not maybe, but it's real. And you know, then we can start to be ahead of the game. And we usually do start putting things out fairly early, and we work in coordination with the town, and, you know, Boyd and Craig push things out on our website, and the town has a website too. But I think at that point, social media, you know, either, you know, puts the message out or they debunk it. You know.
The important thing to remember about Hurricane Bob, though, is as much damage as it, and it caused a lot of damage, it struck at low tide.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, someday.
You wouldn't know it seeing dumpsters floating around the harbor. But yeah, it was interesting. So yeah, so you know, we'll come next month. We'll put something out. And I think this is what we wanted to ask you: is if you have any ideas or any interest that you would like us to make available through a presentation, we can find individuals that can bring good expert advice or have a little more knowledge about a certain issue that's related to emergency planning, let us know, and please forward it to Kim, and we'll do our best to research it. We usually try and keep this to an hour, so I'm close to it, because we know everybody's got a lot going on, but I think it's important just to, even if we meet for an hour, that if there's anything that needs to be passed along or anything we need to discuss, to please bring it up, because this is the perfect opportunity. But if you have an idea, you'd like to see something discussed at one of our meetings, let us know, and we can do something. I mean, we come up with ideas, but it's always good to hear something from everybody else, and we will, we'll do our best to, to keep everybody's interest in, the preparedness side of our the community. So, yes, no. Boyd, anything? No. All right, good. Sir, Mr. Renshaw, anything?
No, I'm just happy to be here. 15 months I've been wanting to make one of these meetings, and this is the first time.
Yes.
So I apologize for taking so long.
No. We always take a break in the summertime because everybody's busy. So, and like I said, I had to wait, a couple of months to get Frank, but he's always, I actually wanted Frank here because I wanted to, this La Nina thing was really starting to pester me because I was hearing so much. I wanted a good common sense explanation, and we did just that. But yeah, no, we welcome everybody, and whenever you can come here, that's fine, sir. And the rest of the group, we appreciate it too. We have representatives from CERT, obviously the Coast Guard. That's awesome to have somebody there. We have our usual. Nate makes his the meetings with us once in a while, so that's even better.
Town of Bourne Administrator, want to thank, I'm sorry, take that back.
Oh, okay, yeah. And Bob Griffin is, with the Harbor Masters, makes the meetings, and it's we get a varied amount of people here, from time to time, but it's always we always have a good showing, and we want to continue that and to be productive. That's the biggest thing. So again, let us know what you'd like, Kim.
I did just want to mention that CERT had a meeting the other night here, and 14 members came in for updated IDs, which is great. Shows that CERT is still very active. For those that aren't aware, CERT is our community emergency response team. They're local volunteers that assist us. For me, most importantly, is with shelter operations, but they do so much more in the community with helping the road race and other community events that occur.
Absolutely, and and CERT meets here. They have the ability to muster their group together and utilize our facilities and have their meetings, and they've had their training. And although we haven't had major events for them to be involved with, I would never want to see them be complacent either. I want to, keep doing what you're doing to be prepared, because one day they're gonna, we are gonna put them all together, and I won't hear the end of it from Mel. Thank you for putting us in there.
Oh, no, you won't.
Yeah. Last time I did, it was like 5 in the morning. I called him. I definitely woke him up, but it was a good wake-up call. But yeah, so CERT's, it's a little different for them versus some other communities that I'm aware of that have a lot of activity, but their numbers, I think, have grown a little bit.
A little bit, yeah, we lost some, we gained some.
Yeah, and we support them. They house one of their response vehicles at our East Falmouth Fire Station, and we take care of it for them. And it's got equipment to support their activity and to support ours, and we work together. So it's a good feeling knowing that I know who they are, and I can they're familiar faces, and that's important, and that's what makes this community so different than others. We pretty much know everybody. So that being said, I appreciate it. We made it to just about 1,500, and if there's nothing else from anybody, we will be forwarding you another invite. Again, get to us, and if you don't, we'll find something of interest to, because we'll be into the November, so maybe there'll be a storm or something to chat about, and we can pass along Frank's, score sheet and how well he did. So thank you, everybody, and appreciate you attending, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
All right.